Steve, what's going on? Welcome to the Dad Edge, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You bet. And what if we start out with just a couple of fun questions before we jump into the interview, actually?
Sure thing.
All right, let's do this. So, growing up, what was your go-to sport?
Well, originally it was gymnastics. I was really big into gymnastics for a long time, went to gymnastics camps and so on. And the only thing that lured me away from gymnastics eventually was martial arts. I just got tired of just watching the Saturday afternoon kung fu movies all the time, and eventually said, no, I have to go do this. And then I was hooked from the start on that and been hooked ever since for 40 years.
Yeah, that's what you were saying before we hit record today, is that you've been doing this now for 40 years. But what was your first martial art that you did?
Tang Soo Do.
Oh, Chuck Norris's, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Originally Tang Soo Do. I had my first classes in that at my local Y, you know, and got into that. And then those classes kind of petered out because there weren't many kids attending. So it was me fighting with the two adult instructors.
I bet that was a good
But
time.
not for me so much after a while,
Right.
but it was for them. Yeah. And so then I drifted on from that into others.
And so, yeah, so it sounds like that really kind of started your journey into martial arts. What did you do after that?
I went into an eclectic system after that. That's what they were, these sort of mixed martial arts things were called back in the 80s. So I went into an eclectic martial art that mixed some different stuff together, and then really moved into training in under a lot of different people, but not for rank, but just getting deep into the art with them on a more personal basis. And eventually really started looking at all the principles behind the martial arts, what they have in common. And that's really what kind of drives my interest in it for the most part.
Do you still practice today?
Oh yeah, I practice. I teach a couple nights a week to a dedicated group of students, and I used to run a big martial arts festival for a while up in the Northeast as well, Saratoga Martial Arts Festival. But I've handed that off to somebody else after 15 years of doing that.
Oh, wow. Super cool, man. Well, give us a glimpse of what it was like for you growing up as far as siblings and just the relationship you have with your own mom and especially your dad, since this is obviously a dad show.
Yeah. So I have two older sisters, and they're enough older than me where I wasn't necessarily around with them very much because they were off to college or at least in high school and busy with high school things when I was growing up. So I didn't see them as much. But with my parents, so many great examples from them about work ethic and getting along with people and so on. But I think the source of tension with my parents was that I didn't do well in school growing up. I didn't do terribly. I wasn't failing out of school, but I really was not earning great grades. And the irony of it is, now I have a PhD, and I've taught at colleges for 30 years and so forth. And but my argument to them was that school's not doing the right thing. This is really truly my argument. When I was 10 years old, I was saying, I don't understand why I have to learn some of this stuff, because I grew up in a very intellectually rich household. Thinking was valued, learning was valued. But I said, why are we learning this? It's not helping me in my life at all. I'm learning facts about the Civil War, which is fine. I mean, it's good to study history, but I'm just tested on the facts that has no application in my life. So I was saying this when I was 10. And really, I realize now, it's funny that you asked this, because, I realize now my whole life, in a lot of respects, my professional life was a rejection of, or a reaction to, that tension with my parents, that started when I was a younger kid because I wasn't getting good grades. So everything that I've done since then has sort of emerged to create an education for people that's doing something better.
Yeah, so it sounded like even at 10 years old, you had some critical thinking just by maybe just genuinely how you're wired, maybe as a person.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm also naturally wired to try to look for a different idea.
Mhm.
Whatever the status quo is, I don't tend to accept it on face value. So, and I was raised to question things. It was very valued in my household, was not to take things on face value. But they just didn't like it when I did it with school.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
When was it for you growing up that it clicked that you're like, you know what? I'm not really sure if some of these things are applicable to my life. So I'm going to go ahead and go in this direction and study this and do that. When did that, what age and where were you at in life where that showed up maybe?
Yeah, it didn't happen until college for me, because in college there was a paper I wrote on Emily Dickinson, and it was the first time that I really clicked into being able to develop my own idea, and it was valued by, and the professor was really helping me with that. And that changed things for me because it shifted education. Not that there were no opportunities before that. It was just the moment where it clicked for me. It shifted education from the acquisition of material to outputting new ideas. And then when I got to graduate school and I taught my first writing class, and I fell in love with that, with teaching and teaching writing. That for me was also where everything really shifted. And that really set the agenda for my life ahead of me.
I always like to ask when someone says, hey, it was this part that I really, really liked. So this part was meaningful. This part really clicked for me. What was it about teaching that was just so meaningful for you?
It's a great question. And I don't know if I've ever been able to fully get my head around it. I think what's interesting is about teaching, and I'm going to paraphrase someone who said, I don't remember who, but teaching is, I think, the hardest job there is in so many respects, because you're dealing with a myriad of different minds who are coming at things from a myriad of different perspectives, and everything that's involved in the human condition in that process. And yet you have to take that group and make them better by the end of a relatively short period of time. It's the most humanistic thing there is, and also the most important, because I'm critical of the educational system in certain ways, but never of educators. I mean, we have no advancements. We have nothing else in this world. We have no astronauts. We have no scientists. We have nothing if we don't have teachers, because that's where everything else is coming from, right? Doesn't mean we're always doing it at the best, but I think it's such important work that the meaningfulness to me of that and the seriousness of that on that respect was absolutely critical. And then being able to really engage with students and feel as though I could lift people up was the best feeling in the entire world, that I could take someone and help them be a little bit better by the end of an experience, for me, is such a meaningful thing to be able to do. And it's so rewarding. It's also something I get out of teaching martial arts. It's something I get out of teaching women's self-defense classes, right? It's that you have somebody who is in a rawer form, and then a period of time later, they're a better person in a certain respect, right? And a lot of that's on their work and the effort they put in, but a teacher gets to take a little bit of credit for that as well. And I think that's so impressive whenever that happens, not just as I do it, just when anybody does that for somebody else. What a meaningful, wonderful thing that is for the world.
You bring up such a good point that I think, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about the men in the audience who are listening to this podcast. And I think we can all identify with a teacher that we had an experience with that we're like, man, this teacher like really changed the game for me, or they really shifted my perspective, or they deposited things in me that weren't there before, and it made me a better person because of it. And yeah, I've got my own experience with the martial arts. I definitely got that there. I had an eighth grade teacher and that was the time when Dead Poet Society had just come out, that
Mm-hmm.
movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember even being in eighth grade, and this teacher, I still remember her name, Mrs. Delarco. She would always encourage us, be bold in life, be brave in life. Don't be afraid of failure. Try to decide on what your path will be. All these things that were in traditional school, everything was like, it had to fit in this box and you had to think this certain way. And it's actually the next question I have for you before we start getting to what you do and how you go about doing it is, what is your view on just the typical school system right now? What does that do to critical thinking skills?
Well, it's not my view, because it's the research on with the critical on the school system right now that's so challenging to us. So if I asked your listeners, what they thought the percentage of college students were. We're talking juniors and seniors, okay, who are proficient in critical thinking. Roughly, where do you think they'd put the percentage?
Man, I would say 10%.
That's pretty good.
Is it?
Uh, it's
Okay.
it's pretty close. It's 8%.
Wow.
It depends upon the study. There are a number of different studies on this. None of them show anything that's doing great work for colleges and universities. And the reason is that, as I write in my book, that we consign our students to living inside a world of other people's ideas in our educational system right now. That for the most part, what they're doing is learning things other people thought. And that's not my opinion. That's what the research tells us is primarily the outcome, that the vast majority of education is doing absolutely nothing to cultivate people's thinking skills and be independent thinkers for the rest of their lives. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. And it's not because teachers don't want to, but we're predicated on the wrong idea. Sure, do we need to learn other information? Do we need to learn ideas other people have thought? Of course we do. Of course, you'd be crazy not to, right? I'm not going to start with trying to figure out fire again with our kids, right? We want them to learn all these things that brilliant people have thought of along the way. But the emphasis should be on helping them develop their own ideas and solve their own problems and solve the world's problems. So one of the problems is, as I said, most educators really want to teach critical thinking. And a lot of them believe they're making that effort to do so. The problem is that the way they do it is they'll do it through things like, let's say, a class discussion as a hypothetical example, where there's an opportunity to, people can express their opinions about things and what have you. But there's a difference between creating a situation where people have an opportunity to think and creating a situation where you're teaching people how to think better. And that is the great error of our modern schooling for even the most well-intentioned educators. What we know about teaching thinking is that it can't be done through osmosis. It's not done just by creating an environment where somebody might be able to answer a question or write an essay and express a thought. It has to be done through what's called explicit thinking instruction. You have to teach them how their brain works, and you have to teach them how to use it better through explicit means. That's the only way critical thinking really gets learned as a skill. It's a skill, and it has to be learned just like we teach kids to read, and we teach kids to do math, and we teach kids to write. We should be teaching kids to think as a skill that's learned instead of something that we hope that they get or something that we believe is simply an innate talent like intelligence. It's very different than intelligence.
I know some of the feedback, you're really speaking my language, by the way. I know some of the feedback that you've gotten from parents that you've worked with is that when we teach our kids these skills, it takes stress off them as parents because we're raising kids who are critical thinkers. And by doing so, we're actually raising kids who are better problem solvers. And from a kid perspective, or let's just say a young person's perspective, because they're not going to stay a kid forever, is it actually reduces their anxiety because they have these skills to problem solve. But without what I'd really love to do, because if I really think about the audience, I know for a fact we have men in the audience who homeschool their kids, right? And they have their own reasons for that. And then we have, I would say the majority of our guys who listen to the show have their kids in the traditional school system. And they're probably, what they're asking right now is like, okay, I definitely understand this because my kid doesn't know anything about taxes or income or interest rates, but he knows polyellograms and quadratic equations, which quite frankly, unless you're an engineer, those are useless. So if a parent is listening to this show right now and he's like, okay, I want to teach my kids at least one or two or maybe three skills, and it's super simple, I can teach it to them. They can actually go and start implementing it. What have you found have been the easiest ones for kids to go test this out and get some wins right away?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so glad you asked it because, it's what I realized as a father. I've been teaching critical thinking, for years. My son's 12, so I've been teaching for 30 years. But I realized when I was a father, I said, my God, my most important job is, and we never do, but my most important job is to become obsolete, to make this guy be able to survive on his own without me in the world. And that means thinking skills. And the stress I felt about that was amazing. And remember when I referenced sort of the tension with myself and my father, I realized that was the stress he was feeling for me. Was I felt more empathy for him. He's passed now. I felt more empathy about that because I realized that's when we had friction about that and he was upset with me. It's because he was so scared of my ability to go, and he was feeling the stress of being able to prepare me to go out into the world. So critical thinking's hard to teach if you don't know exactly how to teach it. And it's hard to figure out those things that we can do with kids that are simple fixes, because a lot of the things that we want to do with that are simple fixes are actually very counterproductive. And I'm going to give you an example of a counterproductive, then I'll answer your question and tell you something that we can do, because there are things and they're so important. So for example, a lot of I met a guy the other day who's a professional, and he was saying, I was talking about what I was doing, and he was talking about his kids, and he said he got them some lessons on identifying logical fallacies in what people say. So for example, spotting non sequiturs or hasty generalizations, and so forth. And he said, so, how's that for doing with critical thinking, right? I'm teaching them critical thinking. And I said, well, it's good to know those things in a respect, but actually they're very counterproductive, because our brains have, and this is science fact, our brains have an inclination to want to be right. We like being right. And that's not just because it feels good emotionally. There's actually cognitive things that happen in our brain that make us want to try to move to being right very fast and make us feel good when we feel like we're right. When we take a young brain and we teach it to spot logical fallacies, what we're doing is arming it with a new way to feel right faster. That doesn't mean that we've really taught it to be a better thinker and problem solver. We've just made it a better critic of other people's ideas. Right? Now, just being a critic of other people's ideas hasn't solved the problem. It hasn't developed a new idea. It hasn't innovated a new technology, right? All it's done to make you feel better because you can criticize somebody else. And we're doing that enough in our world today. So here's what I recommend instead, that every parent can do, and you don't need to know all the ins and outs of critical thinking in order to do it. Of course, you should learn them down the road. But what you can do is you can start to help your kids be metacognitively aware. Metacognition is a simple idea. It's the ability to think about your thinking while you're thinking it. I'll say it again. Metacognition is the ability to think about your thinking while you're thinking it. So the one thing that we can do as a species that no other thinking animal can do is we can be aware of our own thoughts. We know that we're thinking, and we can monitor our thinking. And you can help your kids do that. And you start to say, when a kid does something, you say, well, what went on in your brain that made you do that? This is something I say to my son a lot. He laughs when I start to ask him this question now. I usually don't get to finish it because he's so used to it. But I say, what happens in your brain when you decided to do that? And of course, at first the kids are going to say, well, I don't know. I don't know what happened. And, of course, right. But even when they're very young, you can start to do this. Or you can say, well, what was the thing that you were thinking? Or what was your brain reacting to? And help them start to become aware of their thinking process. One of the best ways we all become better thinkers is simply to become aware of our thinking process. What are we paying attention to? Why are we paying attention to it? What are we valuing in the decision that we make? What made you make this shift? What's something in our family culture? What's something in what you're learning at school? What's the thing that drove you to decide X instead of Y? And kids can do that from a very, very young age. And we know that if we just get kids to do that, it's a good step towards making them better critical thinkers down the road. It's not everything they need, but it's certainly something every parent can do. And then it's not a matter of trying to get them to make this decision or that decision. It's helping them become aware of what they're valuing and how they're processing so that they can always apply that to making better decisions.
All right. So I already know I want to talk to you for like 4 hours, because this
Happy I'm here all day.
This is so fascinating. Can I share a quick story with you? And I would love for you to just sort of pick it apart.
Yeah.
Okay. So this literally just happened yesterday. My 9-year-old had a soccer game, and they were playing this team that was pretty darn good. My son's team barely won. They won 2-1, but there was like 20 shots on goal, and thank God the defense was going really well. But at one point, there was one kid on the other team that was pretty skilled, and this kid could not score a goal to save his life, and he was getting super frustrated. And just from a parenting perspective point of view, I was watching, I knew who this kid's dad was because he was yelling at this kid from the stands about how he needed to run harder, shoot harder. I was like, and this kid, what happened during halftime, he crumbled, like literally just crumbled. He's on the other team. And he literally sat on the field. It's 9 years old. So 9 years old, he's sitting on the field. He like takes his head, puts it in his arm, and he just broke. And I was like, oh man, that sucks. And then my son comes off the bench and goes out and helps this kid up. And I was like, what is going on right now? And gives this kid a pat on the back. I had no clue what he said to him, and then gives him knucks, and then they each go their separate ways back to their bench. And I was like, oh my, I was just, my heart was just like melted. Right. So he comes off the field and I'm like, dude, that was like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I asked him that question. I was like, what was going on in your mind that you felt that you wanted to go out there and help this kid? And he was like, I just looked at him and I knew he was so upset. And I was running next to him a lot during the first half, and he just seemed super frustrated. And I just felt really sorry for him. And I just wanted to do something nice. But I never even knew that was more like a critical thinking type question, or being aware of your thoughts and why you were motivated to do something. But I was just genuinely curious because I want to get inside his mind to be like, well, what was going on for you? Like that doesn't normally happen for a 9-year-old. But the story I'm telling myself is that when we ask questions like that, we're helping them identify maybe the behavior and the thought process that might be either replicatable, like they're going to do that stuff more often, or if it's maybe something negative, they're like, okay, yeah, once I start feeling, thinking those thoughts or whatever, or going down that road, maybe I can head it off and not do those things. I know I'm kind of like all over the place with that question and that experience, but I'm sure you could probably dissect it.
Well, I think you said it quite eloquently, really, which is that when we become aware of what our brain's doing, of how we're thinking, we can regulate that process. Now, does it make any sense to you? And to all your listeners, I ask them this, right? When we learn how our bodies work when we're kids, right? We learn how to throw a ball or do whatever we're going to do physically, right? And we learn things even about, how our blood pumps through our body and all this kinds of stuff. All great stuff to learn, right? Why are we not teaching kids how their brains work? Shouldn't that be the single most important thing that we do as a species, is teach our children how to operate their own brains, what's happening in your brain, and how do you work it better? And just becoming metacognitively aware of our thinking process through a parent who asks a good question like you did, to bring it to the surface so that they can identify it and become self-aware of it and build on it, and you affirmed it, does wonders for them moving forward. Now let's talk about what your son did cognitively with this other child. All right. And by the way, no son does that. They don't have some great parents. So obviously you're doing something right, and more power to you. Not that anyone of your listeners are surprised, but anyway, that kid who collapsed, he was in something called, now, of course, I want to be careful because I wasn't there, and, we can't diagnose everything from a story and so forth. But here's what probably happened. He was in something called an amygdala hijack. The amygdala is a tiny little part of your brain. It's the Latin word for almond, and it's shaped like an almond. It looks like a little almond in our brain. It's a very small part of the brain. About 0.2% of your brain is your amygdala. It's very, very powerful, though. It's a switch. The amygdala is a switch between your survival brain. It's called, people think of it as the lizard brain, which it's not really thought of that way anymore. The survival brain and the thinking brain. The thinking brain's the frontal part of the brain, the prefrontal cortexes, and the survival brain's down in the bottom towards the base of the neck. And it's just fight or flight responses. Okay. When the amygdala gets scared, when it's worried that stuff's happening that's bad, okay, it turns on the lower brain and shuts off the upper brain. It actually shuts it off. So there's less blood going to the thinking brain, all kinds of things are happening. So if you've ever been so angry that you said, I'm so angry that I can't think straight, right? I can't think. You literally couldn't think. That's not metaphoric. Your brain was actually shut off because your amygdala got upset. So it shut off your thinking brain so it could put energy into just surviving. Okay. And that's what's kept us alive. So let's be glad for that process. The problem is that the amygdala doesn't understand the difference between a physical threat to our survival and a stressor, like doing poorly at soccer. It doesn't understand the difference between the stresses. It hasn't evolved enough to understand that distinction. So it does the same thing whether you're being physically attacked and your life's in danger, or you're doing poorly at a soccer game and feeling bad about yourself. So this kid's amygdala went into action and could fight, flight, freeze, or flee. And the kid froze, sat down, and froze and couldn't do anything anymore. What your son did was one of the great ways to break an amygdala hijack. Went over there, put a different thought into the head, patted him on the back, you said, and fist bumped him, right? And what that does is it models a different physicality. And modeling a more positive physicality, getting the kid to do something physical that's positive, changes the brain and starts to switch it back out of the hijack, because your son was relaxed and positive and smiled and, fist bumped. And there was a different body language. And we have all these mirror neurons that mirror that in our brains, and the kids start to shift out of that. So your son did something that I would have coached him to do if I was trying to tell him how to help somebody in amygdala hijack. He did it instinctively. It's brilliant. It's such a great example for this podcast. So I'm so glad you brought it up.
Oh man. That is really cool. Cool. It encourages me as a father that when I see, good things that I really, really appreciate, positive characteristics in the kids, is perhaps maybe that's an opportunity to double down and do exactly what you just said, which is understand the thought process that goes along with that, because it's probably going to make it more replicatable, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's scientifically proven to be true. It's more replicatable when it's good, and we're able to suppress it and alter that behavior when it's bad.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this then. Well, let's take a negative situation.
Yeah.
So my one of my older boys, I have four of them. I have two in high school and then two in elementary right now. One of my both my high school guys, they have just senioritis right now, but they're not seniors. They're just like, it's pretty much, they have 2 weeks left of school and they're just like, I just want to be done.
Right.
And one of them, in particular, we don't even go check his grades or whether or not he has missing assignments, because he always does decent in school. And he's actually one of those kids who's always questioning everything, which I think is really cool, because I always tell him, I'm like, man, that's like your money card. I was like, in school you're learning these things, but always be questioning too at the same time. But he never has missing assignments, and there were several missing assignments, and I was blown away by that. And I was like, hey, well, what's going on? I got an email from one of his teachers, and I'm like, hey, do you have missing assignments? He's like, yeah. And I was like, let me see your computer. Opened it up, and there was a lot. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I didn't expect this. I was like, this didn't seem like you. I was like, what's been going on? Like, tell me what the thought pattern has been lately, that you're confronted and with these assignments, you got to do them, and you're deciding not to do them. And at first I don't know. I was like, no, come on, man. I was like, what's going on? And in front of me and my wife, like, he kind of crumbled, and he's like, I don't know. He's like, to be honest, like, I'm so stressed out. Like, I'm burnt out. I'm stressed out. I just want to be done. Like, and it was easier for me to like go to the gym and not do my homework, so the gym makes me feel good. And like, he went on and was very descriptive of like why he was deciding not to do it, and he would do something else. And so we were able to kind of dissect that thought process. But I think for him, maybe it was really important for him to maybe dissect that thought process of why did he fall into that trap. And then the other thing too is we told him, we're like, listen, man, fast forward a few years, you're gonna be in college, And number one, your college professors are not going to stand for missing assignments. Luckily, this teacher is giving you some leeway here. But mom or dad's not going to tell you how to do this. What I want you to do is come back and tell us how you're going to get these things done in the next 7 days. Like, what's your schedule going to be? How are you going to do this? And I think for him to go through the process of like, wow, this was a really negative experience for me. I didn't really like it. And I have to kind of think my way out of it. I have to be really solution based here and really figure out how to do this and balance everything else. But when we shine light on negative things, because I know a lot of us parents, what we want to do is we just want to blast our kids, tell them what they did wrong, why they shouldn't be doing it. There's going to be punishments. What are some of the advantages from a brain perspective and critical thinking perspective if you go to your child maybe a little bit more curious about what the thought process was, and maybe even taking a step of what the solution is? Because I don't know the science behind that. We just wanted him to do it.
Yeah, well, you handle it wonderfully. Um, so first of all, of course, if kids are able to learn critical thinking, then they can take that and apply it to school. And when they find more meaning in what they're doing in school, whether it's being presented to them, but if they have to create it for themselves, critical thinking is what can create it for themselves. And if they create more meaning in their learning for themselves, they'll learn better, their grades go up, and they stay more engaged in school. Plenty of research studies are showing that connection between critical thinking and school engagement and retention of what they learn and depth of what they learn. Now, that's not surprising, but we had to study it to make sure that it was true, right? Nevertheless, and so it's another great reason for critical thinking to be so important. But what you did was, first of all, it doesn't sound like you too deeply turned on the amygdala hijack. When parents get mad, they yell at the kids. What do? We throw them into an amygdala hijack. They tense up, right? They get upset. And so what have we done? We want them to think better. We want them to think about things more. We just shut their brains off, right? Because we throw them into an amygdala hijack, right? So we're saying, why don't you think about this more? Why don't you should think about what you're doing? Well, all the time that we're doing that with them, we shut their brains down because they get stressed out. And that creates that negative response. Amygdala hijacks the brain, and now they're in fight or flight. What have we accomplished? Nothing, right? And it's not going to be until much later on when they come out of that, if ever, that they're going to go back and really now try to think their way through it. What if instead we turn the stress into challenge? And this is, again, coming out of neuroscience. When the brain perceives of a stress as a stressor, a threat, okay, then we go into amygdala hijack. We don't think well. When the brain takes the same thing, the same stimulus that we thought was a stressor, a threat, and we perceive of it instead as a challenge, now the brain turns on. Brain loves challenges. We love thinking our way through challenges. It's actually pleasurable for the brain to do that. The brain likes it. It releases endorphins in us that are positive, make us feel good to take on challenges and think our way through them, not threats, right? See the difference? But it's the same stimulus. It's just really how we're thinking about it, how we're approaching it. As a parent, what you did was you took this stressor that you could have turned into a threat, right? And you made it a challenge. And you made it a problem to be solved. And you let their brain go about the work of solving it instead of telling them what the answer was. Well, they're going to learn to think through their problems if you tell them what to go do, if you tell them what the answer is. You gave them an opportunity and you gave them time, which is very important. You didn't say, tell me right now exactly what your plan's going to be, right? Now we're back into stress. You gave them time to think and work through it calmly, come back with a solution, come back with an answer, and take this on as a challenge. That's what happened from a neuroscientific perspective in your parenting moment, which again, I think you handled absolutely wonderfully. It's a great example for everybody.
I appreciate that. Don't give me too much credit because like I fall on my face a lot too.
We all do.
Right.
We all do.
So let's I'd love an example. So for me, I think some of these examples, like the positive was easy with my little guy because it was a positive, right? And I think the negative one that I just shared with you was easier because like when it comes to like my older guys, like I can have more like sort of man-to-man conversations with them. It's more adult like, but like let's talk to the guys who are raising kids like 8 and younger, right? Where they've got like these little raw brains, right? Like and you're trying to maybe just instill maybe some simple ways to talk to an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, 9-year-old about these different ways of thinking. It's fascinating about, I'm really starting to second guess. Like I'm really starting to think about all the times I had like a knee jerk reaction, went in like a bull in a china shop. And what that approach did is it actually paralyzed their problem solving skills and their critical thinking skills when they were in a situation. But
Yeah.
for the little guys, what's the best way for parents to do that one?
Well, don't change much. So there is a difference between a brain that's sort of 9 and under versus a brain versus 9 and up. 9 and up is when most kids, it's an average, right? It's when most kids start to become more self-aware of their thinking process. Okay. But that doesn't mean that the brain operating before that can't do it. It's just sort of a pivotal moment in that process. And we can encourage it and we can build it so that they can do it sooner and faster. Right? It's not hard to do. It's really doing the same thing. Let me tell you a story of my son.
Awesome.
That
Yeah.
demonstrates this point, because I love this story. When he was, I'm going to say about 4 years old, maybe 4.5, my wife and I were sitting in our family room, and she just baked some chocolate chip cookies. My wife makes delicious chocolate chip pecan cookies. So they are fresh out of the oven. They were sitting on the island in our kitchen. And our son had been playing Lego. He loves to build Lego, and in the other room. And we heard him start to come towards the family room. He had to go through the kitchen to get there. And we hear the pitter patter of his feet. Tap, 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 tap. And they stop in the kitchen right by the island. And we're hearing this. We're not seeing it. We hear him stop. And obviously there's a big plate of cookies there. Now, he very easily could have come to us and said, "May I have a cookie?" But it was close to dinner time, and we're pretty sure he put together the fact that he wasn't going to get a cookie, not then, obviously for after dinner. And so instead he paused, stood there for a good 10 seconds, and then we heard the feet pitter patter away. And they went to the bathroom, where he had a stool that he used for washing his hands at the sink. And we hear the stool knock around a little bit, and we hear it come back, pat, 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 and you hear him place the stool down at the island, and he got himself a cookie. We let this play out because we were just entertained, and we wanted to see what was going to happen. What did his brain do that was different than what any other brain does? His brain came along, it saw a problem to be solved, wanted a cookie, couldn't reach a cookie. It had 2 solutions. One solution, ask mom and dad if he could have a cookie. Decided that wasn't the best route to obtaining the cookie, right? It wasn't going to happen that way. So instead went and got himself the stool. Well, we're able to have a conversation with him about that afterwards. What made you go get the stool? Why didn't you ask us? Right? I think one of the great errors we make as parents, and I didn't really realize this myself, until I was familiar with all the neuroscience and thinking about it, is, and it's part of our culture too, we sell little kids short as thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, childhood, even from a very young age, is a very intellectually rich process. They're thinking all the time. Think about the calculations that are going into playing in the sandbox with a couple other kids, and who gets the pail, and what are we building together, and why shouldn't I throw sand in your face, and all these other little dynamics that are happening in the social cues. They're thinking all the time. It doesn't mean that we're always making the best decisions. Doesn't mean that our kids don't do silly kid things a lot of the times. Of course they're going to, right? Of course. But they're thinking all the time. We can help them monitor that. We can help them start to become aware of that. We can help them do it better. Every parent can. Every parent, every dad listening to this can help their kids do it better just by starting to help them unpack what's going on in their brains in that process. And you're not going to do it as deeply with a 4-year-old as you're going to do it with a 16-year-old. I don't mean to suggest that, right? But that's not the question. The question is, are you therefore helping to build their brain the right way from a very young age? Are you engaging them in the right process? Are you leading them to do the right things when they're thinking? Yes, that's what's important about it. And the earlier we start, the easier it is, right? All along the way, as opposed to waiting. We think people say, well, we have to wait till they're a certain age to start teaching them critical thinking. That's insane. That's crazy. No, let's start as early as can. I'll tell you something else about kids. So there were research studies done on newborns. So they took newborn babies, just born, still in the hospital. So a day in the hospital. And they showed them an iPad. And on the iPad, there were a number of different dots. And they also played a number of different tones. And the tones either matched the number of dots or didn't match the number of dots. So if there were 16 dots, they might have played 16 tones, or maybe they're going to play 11 tones. Newborn babies could tell the difference between whether or not the tones matched the dots. Newborn babies. Because we're born as thinking creatures. This is our primary survival thing. This is the reason we're all alive. It's the reason our species are here. You and I are having this conversation, not because our ancestors were faster or stronger or had bigger teeth than other creatures that wanted to eat them. It's only because our ancestors had bigger brains. We are thinking creatures from the beginning, and it is our most treasured and important skill, and kids have it. By 16 months, kids can tell the difference between someone who's lying to them and someone who's telling them the truth. At 16 months old.
Way.
16. Now they have to know some of the subject matter, right? But they can tell the difference. Okay. So they're so much smarter. We're so much smarter than we think as a species, and our kids are too. Unfortunately, as I said, the great crime here is that we don't operate our educational system, and we often don't operate our parenting from the perspective of building a brain from the scratch, from the start, from early on. And we think that's something that has to happen later, or something that kids really can't do, and so on and so forth. Hey, it is, though. It's something that they're doing all the time. We take kids who are having this amazing, intellectually rich experience in the sandbox with another kid, right? And where there's all kinds of social dynamics and things going on in free play. The mind is beaming with activity during free play. And then they get into school, and we tell them to memorize who is the first president of the United States. Now consider that schooling interaction and the simplicity of it, and how two-dimensional it is for the brain compared to the rich social interactions that they were having in free play as kids, or with their parents, or doing things, right? There's no comparison. And we know this from MRI scans. They did something where they put portable fMRI monitors on college students, and they tracked them for a week. So they monitored all their brain activity for a week and everything they were doing. And they just had the college students write down what they were doing every hour, or whenever they changed their activity. And we saw all kinds of different brain activity, different kind of brain waves, all kinds of different brain activity when they were interacting with friends, when they were at a party, when they're in sports practice, when they're studying, when they're sleeping. The place that had the least amount of brain activity was class. It was a virtual flat line of brain activity when kids were in class. And now what's sad about that, if that's not sad enough on its face, is that what we also know is that when a brain is bored, it's like torture. It's physically painful for the body when the brain is bored. Because again, what I said, we're thinking creatures. This is our thing. This is what we do. So when we don't get an opportunity to do it, it's a stressor to us. And we release chemicals and so forth as if we're being tortured. So it's really a travesty. But anyway, yeah, we're thinking creatures. We can do it from the start. Start doing it early with your kids. Help them become metacognitively aware. Ask them questions. Turn stressors into intellectual challenges with them. Have fun with it. And always as you do it, have a smile. And show them the joy of having to think through things. Show them the joy of turning a stressor into a challenge. Talk to them about your stressors and how you turn them into an intellectual challenge instead. And talk to them about making mental errors and having fun with it. Because if we have fun with it, we're not turning it into stress, and we keep the brain active.
Man, this is so good. I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised about the school thing. I would have thought there would be a little bit, because you're at least in an environment where you're sitting back and quote unquote being stimulated by learning, but I got probably not. One thing I really do want to address with you, and that is before you and I hit record, you talked about how we can better equip our kids with helping them identify maybe what they're doing, things that they're saying, things that they're doing, and then things that their friends are doing. maybe good decisions. And I mean, let's maybe shine a light on the not so good decisions. So, um, it's fascinating to me, and I'm really disappointed in some of the things that I've seen happen in just high school alone. Like just some of the crazy stories that my kids will come home with, or like, their acquaintances or even their circle of friends and some of the decisions they're making. And I'll be honest with you, Steve, like there's a part of me during conversations, I'm like, I don't want to have a conversation like this. Meaning, like when one of my sons tell me about it, some kid, I'm like, well, you shouldn't be doing that, or I'm glad you're not doing that. And, and versus I want to be better at having conversations with my kids around identifying some of the things that their friends are doing and they're telling me about it. But I want to strike that balance between being like, hey, you can come and talk to me about this stuff. Like I'm a safe person for you to come and talk to me about this stuff. Also, let's have maybe an adventurous conversation around it, around what you think about it and that type of thing. But I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know what good looks like.
Well, I think some of your examples show that maybe you have an inclination of what it looks like, but it's one of the things that our programming does that I think is a unique aspect to what we're doing, is that the program that we have for kids, obviously parents can watch it at the same time with them and they learn, but then we actually have a little supplement for the parents as well that talks about the science behind it. So parents understand even better what's happening in their kid's brain and how to have these kinds of discussions. So what we want to do is not be the authority of right answers and right and wrong with our kids as they get older, or even as much as they're younger, right? It's not to say that we don't want to establish moral guideposts for kids, but it's a question of how do we do it, right? If we dictate morality and decisions to our kids, they may, in fact, follow those moral prescriptions, but they haven't learned to think morally on their own. They haven't learned to solve that next problem that challenges their moral framework in a complex way, in a way that hasn't been challenged before, and apply. They might just either, apply what they think or go by what they know. And we know that this is sort of how the brain works. The brain works through something called heuristics. Heuristics is a fancy word for a model. Okay, so basically when you encounter a problem, you encounter a model for your brain has a model for how it approaches that problem. It's a heuristic. So when you see what's 17 plus 18, your heuristic for that you learned is addition. And that's the heuristic. That's the model your brain learns, right? It's a mechanism. Okay, so it goes into addition. It doesn't use the heuristic for how to change a tire when it sees the math problem, right? That's a different heuristic that it learned another way. So that's what a heuristic is, okay? Well, if we're dictating morality, we're dictating decisions to our kids and telling them what to do all the time, either they have a perfect heuristic for every situation that's going to arise within that morality, which no one ever does because that's impossible, or their heuristic becomes, let me ask my parents or someone else or an authority figure what I'm supposed to do, which is not what we want them to do if we want them to think for themselves. So let's try to change the heuristic. What if we're able to give them a critical thinking heuristic that applies to everything that they're ever going to face? Moral, economic, social, name it. This critical thinking heuristic, because it's driven by how the brain naturally operates anyway, is something they can apply to everything they ever do in the rest of their lives. Now, all you have to do as a parent then is help them work through that heuristic, that critical thinking heuristic, in when they encounter the next problem, when they come to you. So instead of telling them what you should do or getting down on them if they maybe did something wrong, I mean, we talked about that. Of course, I'm not saying we never tell our kids that they didn't do something right. I'm not suggesting that at all, right? But it's how we go about it. And if you're able to sit there and talk to them about it and help them reason through it based on what goodness is, what you've talked about before, about what it is to stand up for oneself, what it is before to do right by people, what it is to do to live a positive life in the world and so forth, for all the moralities that you have. And we'll vary on that a little bit as parents, but largely we're talking about the same things. And help them think through it for themselves. Help them be an aid to them as saying, well, what do you think about what so-and-so did? What do you think about what so-and-so said? What do you think motivating that? Is that something you'd want to be motivated by? What motivates you? To what extent does that motivate you? And to what extent are you motivated by other things? So, for example, they very well be partly motivated by the fact that that's what all their friends are doing. And they want to be part of that group because their friends are doing it, even if their friends are doing something that, is potentially a little problematic, right? That's okay. We don't want to say, well, you just can't do that. That's wrong. So just don't do it, because that's not really helping them contend with the problem of the fact that they don't want to be a social outcast and they still want to have these friends. That's a real problem that we all have in our lives. And we're always making choices about things that we do with groups. So instead, let's help them acknowledge that part of the problem, but then let's also walk them into understanding other factors that they have to value and weigh out in the situation and try to find a path through it that's a positive path for them. And hopefully a solution that's the Goldilocks, right? We don't always get to the Goldilocks solution, but it's the one we want. But, at least help them try to navigate it. So let's talk through things with our kids and help them understand what they're valuing and clarify for them, instead of trying to dictate those moral situations to them and the decisions that they need to make in their lives and so on and so forth.
Man, this is so good. Just being more genuinely curious and welcoming the conversation of the thought processes. It sounds like what you really help parents do, or individuals and parents as well, is how do I teach an operating system that when you're confronted with a problem, like any problem, right? I mean, even take martial arts, right? It's going about life that if you're being attacked in this way or this way or this way or this way, you now have an operating system to defend yourself no matter what the attacker is potentially doing. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So what I did at the Institute is this. So I was hired by a university to raise critical thinking across the university. That sounds like it's something that there should be a lot of models for doing that, except it really hadn't been done. Okay. There's almost no university has ever shown critical thinking gains across the university, across all the disciplines and so on. Freshman students through PhDs. So I looked at all of the other models for doing that, all the critical thinking instruction out there, and none of it was landing with great success. Some of it was achieving some gains, but none of it was really achieving this kind of holistic success that we wanted. So then I started to look a little back further, and by back a little further, I don't mean a couple of years or 20 years. I went all the way back into evolutionary biology. And what evolutionary biologists have figured out is that all organisms on the planet, even single-celled organisms, have the same root problem-solving mechanism baked in. We do too, okay? We do it at a much more advanced level, but in order to survive, even, amoebas and parameciums solve problems in a sense, right? They're able to know what's a danger, able to know what's a reward, and so on and so forth. And it's a bit more complicated than that. But I said, well, what if instead of prescribing some ideas about critical thinking that we're just going to push on to students, what if we built a critical thinking model that was based in the natural way all organisms solve problems to begin with, including humans? And humans have to do it on a much more complicated level, but we also have brains that are equipped to do it on a much more complicated level. So what if we build it out of that? If we build it out of that, guess what happened? It was easy to learn. How could it not be easy to learn? It's how our brain operates anyway. It's how we naturally solve problems to begin with. Why don't we just become self-aware of that and then exercise it, right? So what I like to say is that everyone has some capacity to run, or at least, most people do, right? I don't want to be rude to people who don't have legs, but everyone has some capacity to run, right? That doesn't mean that because you have some capacity to run, that if you want to be a great runner, you don't have to exercise that. Then when we're talking about exercising, we're not only talking about building muscle, we're talking about technique and posture and strategy for long-term running and so on and so forth, right? All these things now that we know about how to teach people how to run better if they want to be great runners. What if we did the same thing about thinking? Everyone has capacity to think. Everyone. Of course, everyone's thinking all the time in their lives, right? The average person makes about 30,000 decisions a day. Okay. Most very, very small, very, very tiny decisions, but some of which are certainly consequential. What if we taught people how to think and exercise it the way we teach people how to run or we teach people how to read? Couldn't we have a better world? Couldn't we have happier, less stressed out kids? Couldn't we be happier, less stressed out parents? Couldn't we solve problems? Couldn't we teach our kids to solve the problems that they're going to face when we're not there? The individual personal problems that they have, as well as the global problems that we need fixed, you know? So we can do it. We now know that there are ways to teach people to think better. And that's what we want to do, is change the world one mind at a time.
This is so cool. You got my mind just swirling, like, of how I can go about having better conversations with my own kids, even better conversations with like our members and our clients, around, their thought processes and their thought patterns. I do have one question for you that's just looming, and that is do you think there is a time that instead of parents, getting into like, hey, tell me the thought process behind this, or what do you think of this, or what do you think of that, or this or that, versus like, I really need to tell you what's going on here, and I need to tell you how to do this, and I need to be more, for lack of a better word, maybe more that dictator role versus more like that trusted, maybe advisor where I'm doing life with you?
Well, I think, there's always a spectrum. And I think there are certainly some moments where as parents, as the more experienced person in that situation, there are some rare moments where we got to throw down a line, at least initially, right? Because sometimes there isn't also time to talk through things. And instead we got to make a quick decision about things, or tell them, something that they were about to do is not going to happen. But for the most part, no, right? So with exception, I would say the answer is no. Time being one of the biggest factors, right? If we have to have time to do it, but the answer is no. And the reason is, what are we training our kids to do? Every moment is a training opportunity for the rest of their lives. And we only get about 18 years in our culture of serious training with them, right? And even less as they get to be teens and around the house a lot more, and so on and so forth. But every moment's a training opportunity. And every time you miss one of those, it doesn't come back to us. And the research on the difference between kids who are raised in an authoritarian household versus an authoritative household is pretty clear. Kids who are raised in an authoritative household, which is where parents are the sole source of right and wrong and are telling the kids what to do, okay, haven't as much developed critical thinking skills when they're older as kids who are raised in an authoritarian household. An authoritarian household is where still the parents might be the intellectual leader, but they're not just telling the kids what to do. So there's a difference between a kid saying, why do I have to go to bed now? And the parent says, because I told you so. That's authoritative, right? Authoritarian. But in an authoritative household, it's, why do I have to go to bed now? Well, why do you think you have to go to bed? Why do you think I'm telling you to go to bed? Okay, well, it's because, I don't know. I said, well, why do you think? Well, I guess last time I stayed up a little later, I wasn't really awake for school the next day. Okay, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to let the kids stay up later. It just means that we go about the process of making that decision a little differently. They're still going to bed at the same time, but it also opens this opportunity up. And this happens with my son a lot as he gets older. And we're saying, well, listen, once in a while, he comes up with an idea, a reason why he should be able to stay up later. That's a great thing, or whatever that is, right? He comes up with an argument. That's great. And we go, okay, you win one, right? You convinced us, but you convinced us through reason, right? You didn't just fight back. You didn't just say, I don't want to go to bed. You didn't throw a temper tantrum. You didn't stomp around and resist, and so forth, and try to win that way. You came up with a great reason for this. And we said, okay, you won one tonight. Great. Good job, right? That's what we want, isn't it? We want reason to prevail. And if they come up with a reason that's better for something, then that's great. And that's only going to happen if we give them the opportunities to build their thinking skills and know that thinking is valued in our household. Not just what I think, but what he thinks, right? Yeah. Treat him as an intellectual who's part of the intellectual intelligentsia of the house. right? Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to be the ones coming up with the best answers all the time. We are smarter and older and more experienced. But if they have to have the opportunity to feel like they can be heard and their thoughts can be valued, because if they don't feel like their thoughts can be valued, what's the point of thinking?
Mm. You know, man, this is so cool. I think that this is I come to life personally like even though like I kind of like on the inside I'm like, how creative is he going to be? You know, meaning like one of my kids, right? So like I'll get one of my teens or even one of my little guys be like, "All right, so dad, check this out. Okay, before you say no, I'm going to just check this out." Like, right? And then they'll like literally like line up like a story, a situation, methodology behind it, reason behind it. And yeah, I sometimes I sit back, like there's a part of me as a parent that's like, yeah, you're not going to convince me. But then there's the other part, which I would say is probably more the 80/20, which I'm like, this is good. I just want to see how you're operating. Like how are you going to solve this? How are you going to convince me? Right. My 15-year-old of all of them, he is like, we always tell him, we're like, you should really think about being an attorney because your stories are so darn compelling, and you're so adamant about your stance on things from time to time, right? And you will give like slam dunk reasons, and you're just like, wow, that's good. But that's fascinating. It's basically inviting them in to a conversation around, well, I mean, really anything, right? Really anything
Right.
around any situation, whether it be friends, whether it be school, whether it be peer pressure, whether it be drugs, alcohol, like anything. And it really sounds like critical thinking or teaching critical thinking as a parent at its foundation is getting really genuinely curious and allowing your son or daughter to articulate what is going on for them and maybe guiding them through that process. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So at the Institute, we give parents ways to understand what's happening in the brain, to know where to steer some of the conversations sometimes and how to work through things, right? Work through the process. But at the core, it's exactly what you described. It's let me think of our kids as thinking beings and value that they're thinking beings and value their thoughts and invite their thoughts into the discussion. Again, that doesn't mean that because we're inviting their thoughts into discussion that they get to do whatever they want, right? Just because they have a reason for it. That's not at all what we're saying. The lines don't have to change as to where we want them to go. It's how we get them there and how we encourage them to think their way through it and let them know that that thinking is valued in that conversation. And letting them see us not as people who are going to criticize their thoughts and what they want to do, but as models for how to think through things better and as a resource for them to think through things better for themselves, right? Why can't we be their best guides for learning how to think through things instead of the person who gives them the answer? My son will tell you that it's almost comical. I never answer questions. He has questions about stuff. I don't ever answer questions. My answer is almost everything he says. What do you think? Why do you think that is? What do you think's going? How would you do it? Initially. And that's not to say that we never figure out, I never answer anything eventually or help him do things. I just say, you can't do this, figure it out, sit there and figure it out, until, and there's nothing they're ever going to figure out. So he gets frustrated and gives up. That's not constructive, right? But it is to say that initially, I don't tell him how to do it. I don't explain how to do something or the answer to something. Initially, we start to think through it together, right? And so now he really doesn't ask me anymore, how do I do this? He says, can you help me? He changes the question. I never told him to do this, but it's more of a, can you help me figure out how to do this? Instead of, can you tell me how to do this? Now look at the difference in those two children. A child who says, how do I do this? Or can you tell me how to do this? Versus, can you help me figure out how to do this? Right? That is an entirely different kind of person that's being raised. Right. And every parent can do, every dad listening to this can create that child and have that relationship with the child. And I don't mean that my son and I have a perfect relationship or anything like that. Of course, we're all people, but that's accessible to everybody. And that's a radical difference in how that kid is approaching the world, from wanting to get an answer and not thinking through it to wanting to work with a parent to think through it for themselves. What a difference. What a difference.
And that's probably a really strong breadcrumb of how you're parenting, right? Versus like, can you help me figure this out? Versus like, can you show me how to do this?
Yeah, it's the nugget.
Yeah.
You're building intellectual curiosity. You're building confidence in themselves to be able to think through things. You know how many kids are so insecure when faced with a problem that they won't be able to think through it. They won't be able to solve it, right? It's paralyzing to a lot of kids, for so many different reasons. But some of the reasons are they're not taught how to solve problems in school necessarily, right? And then if as parents, we're also not teaching them how to solve problems, where are they learning how to do that? Right. So
Right.
what if we take that stress off of them and say, yeah, you can think through this. That doesn't mean you can solve it perfectly yourself, but I'm going to show you you can think through a lot of this. I'll help you. We'll help you think through it. I'll help you think through anything, whatever your problems are. Let's think through them together. Right. And then you get better at thinking through them yourself.
I know I said the last question I have for you is I have one more question, but now I have one more question,
Yeah.
which the if I zoom out from this entire conversation and a lot of the beautiful lessons that you've taught us and taught me, is that one big thing is emerging for me, and that is the mental health of our kids, the confidence in our kids, like the whole thing of a kid feeling, the three basic needs of being seen, heard, and safe. My value to this family and to the world, my contributions, like all these things, like that are so probably it's like high nutrition for mental health for our kids if we raise them this way. Is that accurate?
That's a completely accurate statement.
Okay.
Yeah. Kids want to feel valuable. All right. So let's look at social media and how bad this is. I'm not going to talk about just the fact that, it lends itself to so many negative kinds of comments and cyberbullying and that kind of stuff. That's of course a problem in itself. And we talked about how the brain wants to be right. And what's easier to be right than on social media than just criticize what somebody else says? Piece of cake, right? Now you feel great about yourself. Congratulations. Your brain feels right. Okay. But here's what it doesn't do, no matter what else happens. Social media doesn't permit, by the nature of its format, not by what's said, by the nature of its structure, opportunities for thinking through problems, for deep thought, because everything's short, everything's quick, everything's immediate, right? And in that format, there's nothing they can do. They can't feel like they can really think through things. So that contributes to great mental stress, because what does the brain really want to do naturally? Naturally, it wants to solve problems, right? When it's not even given that opportunity, it's not even given the opportunity in social media to really solve problems. Think about how much stress that creates. If we can get them to the place where they can start to solve through their problems, they have a set of heuristic for solving every problem they ever encounter, right? It doesn't make every problem easy. I'm not going to say that because that would be crazy, but at least there's a method for working through it. That alleviates so many mental health problems. Or at least I don't want to say it's going to cure any serious psychological issues, but it can alleviate so much mental stress on kids to know that they have a fallback, they have something to work through. And there's also something that's really important too that you alluded to. And this goes back to being good dads and letting our kids feel empowered and have good mental health within the home psychologically, which is feeling included, feeling heard. Okay. So it's something they call in education limited peripheral participation. So let me show you why this educational system is a problem. Okay. Kid goes into class and they're taught certain things in the class. Maybe they're offered an opportunity to express their opinion about something. Does that opinion ever really change what the teacher does or thinks? Does it really ever affect what's happening in the classroom? No, right? You know that. All the dads listening know that it doesn't, right? It doesn't really change the course of the class. It doesn't really change the expert's opinion. So that has no value whatsoever to the community. Right? You offered an opinion. Everyone knows that it was just spoken and now it's gone and it changed nothing. You have no value to this community. That's what we're taught in education. For the most part, is that you really have no value to the community because you're not going to change the course of what's happening in education by your presence. Now, let's shift that a little bit. Look instead at someone who's going first day of the job at a construction site. They have no construction experience. And what do? Well, what's your job? Your job's going to be to take the scraps of wood here that our carpenters are generating from their good carpentry work and their real skill, and you're going to schlep it over to the dumpster. Okay, now that's not serious intellectual work. It's great, honest work and so forth, but what are they? They're valued. Somebody's got to move that wood. They are the least important members of the team in a lot of respects, the least skilled, right? But they're valued members. They have value to the team. They have value to the workplace, and they're affecting what's happening in that workplace. If that stuff doesn't get schlepped to the dumpster, there's a problem that could slow work down, right? For everything else. That's real important stuff. What you're suggesting is that we really need to make our kids feel like they are valued members of the family, of the home. And that means valued intellectual members of the family as well. Not just valued because they can make us laugh sometimes or whatever, or because they can do a chore. Valued intellectual members. They can bring ideas to the table too. And those ideas can affect what the family does and how the family thinks and how we perceive things. Obviously, they're going to do it less when they're 4 than they are when they're 16. But we want them to be able to do it when they're 4 too, because now we're making them feel like they're valued members of something, seen and heard, but also valued. And that's so great for mental health, because now we're really part of something. And I think a lot of times as parents, because this was the case in my family for a certain period of time when I was growing up, I didn't feel like I could change the course of things. I didn't feel like I was really heard. It's not that my parents wouldn't ever ask me what I was thinking. They often did, but I didn't have the same currency in the household to really change the course of things as much as I would have liked sometimes, or at least to feel like it was a possibility, right? I think that's something that all the dads listening can think about here. If you have kids and you're asking them what they're thinking and so on and so forth, that's nice. Do you invite them into solving problems of the house? How do we figure this out together? What are we all going to do here? Even if it's just, where should we go for dinner, right? We're going out to dinner, or what should we have for dinner? Simple questions sometimes, but let's reason through it together. Let's think through this, right? And everybody's opinion is going to have some currency here. Now we know that thinking is worthwhile. And as we said, great for mental health, because we're valued and we all like to be valued, but we also know that thinking is valued. Thinking has currency. And so now we want to do it more, right? And we feel good about ourselves, and we feel good about our parents for hearing us.
This is awesome. I want to make sure that, and I know, awesome for so many reasons, because as you're talking about this last segment here, being valued, a valued member of the family, what's really funny is, it's funny, not funny, is, 4 boys, my 7-year-old, he probably acts out the most, but he also gets the most slack from all of us, just being real. Really does, and sometimes I'll zoom out, and my wife and I have been doing it a lot lately, where we zoom out, and he's the littlest guy in the room. He's got big boy brothers and 2 parents. Everybody's talking over him. It's very frustrated, I'm sure there's a huge part of him that doesn't feel heard. We don't bring him into decisions because he's like, oh, it's just Colton. He's 7, right? And as you're saying all these things, I'm like, man, it's actually most important that he's not overlooked, because, his mental health will suffer in the long run if he doesn't feel valued here. I think we did that pretty darn well with our first 2 and even our 3rd. With our 4th, I don't think we're doing it as well as we should. And this is a really strong reminder of bringing everybody into conversations and decisions and input. And, even if we're not moving forward with your input, like how valuable it really, really is, And we've always tried to raise our boys. I was not raised like this. I actually hated being at home. Being at home was a more dangerous place than being anywhere else. And my wife and I have always hung our hat, and this is where you can come in. It's good, right? It's a good place to be. You're valued here. You're loved here. This is not where we beat you up more. Decisions you make, we're going to have conversations around them if they're not the greatest. But at the end of the day, this is where you come to be loved. This is where you come to be valued. This is where we come to have better conversations and connection and memories and adventure and all those things. This has been awesome. I want to make sure that the men truly understand what it is that you do. And if we have guys in the audience who are like, man, I want to connect with Steve in a big way, what is the best way for them to connect with you? And then what's the process of how you help people?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that. And I'll just piggyback on the last thing you said too, which is that um, parents sometimes fear inviting kids into participating in intellectual decisions in the house and so forth, because they think the kids feel like they have to get what they want, or they're going to feel disengaged or undervalued. Kids know that they're not the leaders of the house intellectually. They know that they don't have all the wisdom that their parents do. That's not a surprise to them. They'll respect reason if they're given the opportunity to say, we hear what you're saying. That made me rethink this a little bit, but I still feel like this is the stronger reason here. They'll understand that. They'll respect reason. Okay, they can do that. I mean, we're all going to have our temper tantrums sometimes, right, as kids, but for the most part, we're saying here. The other thing that you do that's really important that you're expressing here is you're expressing where some of your decisions aren't the best, right? And I think as parents, we're afraid to do that in front of our kids because we want to, especially as dads, I think, maybe I'm old school, but especially as dads, I think we're afraid to express that where we made a poor decision. Well, what teaches kids better that it's okay to think through things and not be perfect than we see their dads doing that? Doesn't mean they lose respect for us, because we're still their dads and we're still making a lot of great decisions, right? We're still great thinkers compared to what they're doing. But what it's showing is the intellectual humility to be able to admit, hey, I didn't think through that as well as I could have. Well, which dad are you going to go to if you have a problem and you want to talk? You're going to go to the dad who's always right and is infallible and perfect and never made a bad decision in his entire life, right? No, you're going to go to the dad who has admitted to you once in a while when he made a bad decision. Now you feel like making a bad decision isn't so stigmatized. Now you're willing to do it and have that conversation. So how we represent that is so important. What we do at the Institute is we have 2 online programs, online courses in critical thinking. One of them is for kids. It's called Brighter Minds, Better Futures. It's great for kids and teens. It's an animated program, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, it's not stiff and stale. Okay, it's a little boy or a little character talking to a brain character, and the brain is teaching critical thinking, and the little kid is kind of resisting or asking a lot of questions and trying to figure it all out, and some other things happen along the way. And each lesson runs for about a year. Each lesson's only 5 to 10 minutes long, and they're just little M&Ms. Okay, if you think your kids can't understand this, we recommend starting around age 9, but if you have some advanced kids and you're willing to work with them, you could start younger. Mm-hmm. Each episode's just a little critical thinking M&M. That's all it is. But over time, they accumulate into very deep things. We're talking to kids about neuroscience. We're talking to kids about cognitive psychology. We're talking about all these things that seem very advanced, but again, there's no reason we can't understand how our brains work. There's no reason kids can't. They understand can teach them how to throw a ball. You can teach them how to work their bodies. You can teach them what their brain's doing. It's the same thing. It's part of who they are. So we figure out how to teach that to them. And over the course of the year, they learn very advanced critical thinking skills that most adults don't even know. And along with that is a little supplemental lesson for the parents that also teaches them a little bit more about the research behind it and why their kids are doing, and how to help their kids succeed, and practice that over the course of the week. The other program we offer is called Critical Thinking Mastery, and that's really for adults. So if there are adults out there who maybe are listening who don't have those kids right now or what have you, and just want the program for themselves, both programs go through the same curriculum. It's just they do it differently and emphasize some slightly different things. It's really the same stuff. I think the kids program is more fun personally, but we know that a lot of adults don't want to go through the animations and just want to hear me blather at them instead. And that's fine too. They're both great programs. And we encourage everyone to come and check them out, get a preview of the program, and try it with your kids, and give it a little time. Because if you give it a little time, you're going to see that it starts very simply. It starts pretty slowly because we're just easing into it. Because as I said, we don't want to teach the wrong thing at the start that can take brains in the wrong direction. We're really building a brain up from the inside out, okay? And making it a stronger brain, really wiring the brain to think in stronger ways. It takes time. But after, the first handful of lessons, you're going to start to see the amazing ways that your kids start to engage the world differently, how they're able to think through things differently, how they're able to be aware of what their brain's doing, even when they do something that they shouldn't. They're going to go, this is what happened in my brain. I know why I did that. Right. And start to correct for it. There's that metacognition again. And as parents, we're going to give you a language that you and your kids are going to share that's going to enable you to have conversations around thinking, conversations around decisions, conversations around problems that you couldn't otherwise at a depth and a level as you couldn't otherwise, because you don't have a way to talk about it now. You don't know what's happening in their brains either. As dads, we don't know that. We're not raised to understand that. But now you're going to understand what's happening in your kids' brains when they do good things or when they do bad things. We're going to have a language that we share in common with our children and examples that we have in common with our children to start to talk about it. And we're able to say, hey, you know what? Remember that lesson on how this one wire is firing and it's hard to change that wire, but we can build a new wire instead. And here's how we do it. Let's do that, right? Let's work on that here, right? We're going to give you all kinds of ways to do it. And I think the feedback that we get is it seems like what we're saying is very advanced because it's all built on neuroscience and cognitive psychology and neurolinguistics and so on and so forth. But it's delivered so simply that even kids can learn it. And in fact, kids learn it easier than adults a lot of times because kids don't have preconceived notions about what critical thinking is or what have you. So they're open to it and they're blank slates and they can go into this a little bit more easily. So it's starting around age 9, maybe 7 or 8, if you're willing to work with them, and the kids are a little more advanced, that's great. And they're there for everybody. I'm going to tell you something else. The programs probably cost a lot less than the computer that you're watching on this on right now, because I believe this from the heart. We can't price this at a place where only rich kids get to learn to think critically. That's not the right thing for the world at all. So we put it at a place where, at least just about everyone can afford it. And we have a scholarship program as well, because we need to give everyone access to this.
And where can people find that?
At the Critical Thinking Institute, it's the ctinstitute.com. That's the ctinstitute.com. I also offer consulting services for businesses and things like that. You can reach me through that institute as well.
Got it. Awesome. Well, gentlemen, you're not going to have to look far for Steve's resources here. I know for one, I'm going to dive into this. I can't wait. Head on over to thedadedge.com/426 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/426. We'll have a way for we'll have a link in the show notes for his courses, as well as if you want to contact Steve, you can. We'll have that in there as well. We'll have all the resources in there for you. Steven, this was awesome on a level that I can't even explain. I'm going to go back, and I don't usually listen to my own shows, but I'm going to go back and listen to this myself because I want to catch everything. This was just so good. So thank you for coming on and be so giving of your time.
It's been a real pleasure. I absolutely love the questions you asked and where we went with this today. So this was a great treat for me, and more power to what you're doing with dads.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that. Gentlemen, again, head on over to thedadedge.com/426 for this show. And above all else, go out, live legendary. Take care.